So this is the Sherborn Advisory Committee meeting for October 30th, 2024. Welcome. Good to see everybody. Nora, you had a quick thing you just wanted to.
Yes, I'm also like to get permission, confirmation to record it on Plod, which is, it's already being recorded on Zoom, but for a backup on Plod Note.
Nora is taking minutes, so that'll just make it a little easier.
And just as a point of order, at my first meeting, 2 meetings ago, I know I missed the last one, I wasn't sworn in. I'm now sworn in and
Yep.
I've done the ethics training and all that, so.
100% good.
Voting member.
Absolutely, 100% good. Yep. Okay, so let me just put the agenda up for everyone to see. And so, Jeremy, this is showing on that screen. Is that okay? People can see it?
Yeah.
Okay, okay, it's fine.
Yeah.
It's
It's supposed to be duplicating the same, but now some settings changed.
okay, good, good. Okay, as long as people can see, okay, So-
Screen 1 and 2. So
okay, thanks. So we will start with advisory reports. We'll approve previous meeting minutes. And then we'll talk about our guidance letter, specifically hoping that tonight we can come to a consensus on a recommendation for COLA and recommendation for budget guidance, which would be our guidance to budget makers for the non-salary part of their budgets. And that's what I had on tap. Anybody have any changes to propose to the menu to the agenda as posted?
Can't read that. We have a time for non-planned things.
So advisory reports or questions, comments, kinds of things. If we're gonna have a substantive discussion about something, we would need to add it to the agenda and, okay.
Right,
All
I just want to know when the right time to shoot on it.
When we get to advisory reports in a minute. Great. So motion to accept the agenda as read.
Motion read.
Thanks, Stephen. Okay, thanks. Let's just do a quick roll call.
Is anyone on?
Yes.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, there should be about 3 or 4 people on. Thanks, Jeremy. So quick roll call, Stephen. Quick roll call in favor of approving the agenda as read. Thanks. Ken,
Aye.
Paul,
Aye.
Nora,
Aye.
Mike, aye.
Aye.
Michelle, Doug, and I'm aye as well, so it gets us there. Okay, great. So let me start with one advisory report, just an update on the regional school committee letter. We had said at our last meeting that that was going to get sent out by the end of, I think, last week, if Dover didn't come along. I've been back and forth with them. They were going to have meetings at the end of last week, so I was waiting for that to happen. I've been back in touch with them this week. As best I can tell, they haven't yet coalesced around agreeing to be co-signatories on the letter. So my intention would be to just send it early next week. If they're ready to go, they can have their signatures. If they're not, we'll send it. I think I would sign on behalf of advisory. I think Peter Morris would sign on behalf of capital budget. And if the process in Dover works through and they want to add themselves as signatories, they can do that. Or if they want to send a separate letter, they can do that. But it feels to me that to be relevant for this budget season, we need to get the letter over there. I think that's pretty much consistent with what we talked about before, but just wanted to give everybody that update. So that was it for me on advisory reports. Other things that anybody wants to bring to the committee?
Just to update on the assessor's office, Wendy Alessi has put in her resignation. Jeremy, I assume if you want to add anything to that, like, I don't know how long she's here for
Yeah,
and,
sure. She's given a fairly long notice, about a month or so. So, but she's taken another job in the town of Westboro. In the interim, she's helping us set the tax rate, which is the tax rate hearing. This is the first week of December. She's committed to helping get Sherborn a tax rate and complete that process before she takes on her other responsibilities in Westboro. We have a transition plan in place. The job is advertised. We have received a couple resumes.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Ken?
I have two things. There's one thing that I was hoping we could address in executive session, so we could put those wheels in motion.
Okay, so here's how we should do that.
Mhm.
Why don't you soon, like as in tomorrow, send me an email with,
Okay.
topic and what it is, and then I will check with town council to see if that meets the criteria for having executive session. We can't do it tonight
No, I
since
knew
it's not
that.
on the
Yeah, of
agenda.
course. Yeah,
But if town council says it's okay for us to have an executive session on that topic, put it on the agenda for next week.
okay, wonderful.
So just shoot me an email with, here's the topic.
It
Um,
may not be tomorrow, because I'm going in for surgery.
Yeah, okay. So, yes, that's right. yeah.
I'll write you tonight. I'll try
Okay,
to-
no, that'd be great. I just need something so that I can go to town council and say, that a member of the committee wanted to bring this up. Can we do this in executive session, or do we need to do it in open
Okay.
session?
Perfect.
Yeah, okay, good.
Thank you.
Thanks. And speaking of your surgery, I think everybody here wishes that it goes very, very well.
Thank you. I also had a
go
preliminary
ahead.
liaison report. Steve and I are liaison to the police department. Actually was meeting with Chief Galvin about something else, and I just said, any surprises? And he said there are 3 potential ones where so one of them is part payment for the regional dispatch center is coming due to Sherborn. It's unclear when we're gonna have to pay for that, and it's unclear whether it's gonna be police and fire split or someplace within the town. So that's gonna come to the town.
Possibly this budget year, right?
Probably.
Yeah,
but
in
possibly.
some amount to
Yes,
be
but-
determined.
Yes, so, but that's a 80,000, I think is the amount, but when and where and how, unknown yet.
And potentially could be more than that, I think,
It's
depending on.
annual.
No, that's,
So- Do you want to provide a little
Yeah.
context, a little
Yeah,
background
okay.
on the
so
dispatch?
a few years ago, the town of Sherburne signed on to a regional dispatch center for emergency services. And we got a grant that covered the first 3 years of that in total, and then wound down the grant over a couple of years. Our,
From the state.
Yes,
I believe.
yes.
And so, after 3 years, we're responsible for paying increasing amounts of that and up to 100%. And the contract that Chief Galvin explained to me is what makes it a little bit ambiguous is we got the grant for 3 years, but the contract runs for fiscal years. So we're sort of like trying to make calendar years mesh with fiscal years. So that's when we're not sure when we're gonna have to pay our chunk of it. And our chunk of it, I believe, is 80,000. So it might be all in this year, it might be half of next year. And then it's unclear which town department, under which budget that would fall.
Jeremy, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, sure. So, yeah, after the 3 years, it's phased in that the town pays 50%, 75%, and then the entire share over the course of 3 years phasing in, starting with FY 2026.
All right, so in the first year, we're paying something.
First year, we're
Second,
paying
or third.
50% of the assessment.
Got it.
There is a little ambiguity in it in that we pay quarterly, and the contract started in January 1st of the year. However, fiscal year starts in July. So our interpretation currently is that we're paying 50% of 2 quarters. Over has a different opinion. They think it's 50% of the entire year. So we're flushing that. So that's the difference between 90,000 or 180,000. The full assessment is like 350,000.
So that will be a series of successive hits to the budget in coming years.
So it needs to work some amount. It needs to work into your budget for next fiscal year. Whether that's captured in an existing department or shared line, up for some debate. But there will be something towards that in your budget.
On that or a different thing?
On that.
Okay.
So on the in the category of how do we make decisions in this town? I know we already made this decision, but did someone do an analysis of going to a regional dispatch center and saying, this is gonna be cheaper when we take 100% of it? Someone's done that
Yeah,
work?
there was. I'm happy to take that out. It was, well, the contract was signed before my time, but I'm aware that there was an analysis done.
And the select
There
board,
was a cost savings associated with it.
the select board,
So
and
when we
the
get
ones
to
who made
100%,
that
when we get
decision.
to 100%, it's fair to assume that we're gonna be in a better position than we were doing it ourselves.
That's my understanding. There is a little bit other things at play.
Yeah.
In that there has been other regional dispatch centers that have started up after the one that we're a member of. And they've received essentially perpetual grant funding, so none of the member communities have to pay. So we're actively pursuing that avenue as well.
That sounds better.
We can have that option.
Cheaper is better. Ken, did you have another item?
Yeah, two more things, again, a little uncertainty in them. The department is set to replace two vehicles this year. Chief Galvin would prefer to do one this year and one next year, if he can, which would probably entail a bump up in the maintenance line item for the retained vehicle this year. And then the other thing is, he's looking at updating some of the equipment, and he might need to update all that they have, or only half of what they have. And that amount would dictate whether he does it out of the operating budget or as a capital request.
You said they need to update equipment, which equipment?
The department's rifles.
Oh, the rifle, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay,
And that's why,
okay, thanks.
next time Steve.
Doug, did you have a thing? No, okay, you're just responding, okay. Anybody else with advisory reports thing to bring, info to bring back to the,
Oh, I did have a different question on procedure. You were talking about the agenda. What's sort of the last point at which we can add something to the agenda, like the day before or week before? Like,
that's like 2 days before.
who is-
Um,
So when you
so-
send it out, are you essentially soliciting from us any additions last?
So
Or
here's,
should we come to you, Brian?
so I try to post, so for us to have a meeting, it has to be posted 48 hours ahead. That's, you know, an agenda has to be posted. If stuff comes up from the time it's posted to the time of the meeting, we can at the beginning, when I said, hey, anybody have anything want to add? If it's something, the key being that it couldn't reasonably have been
Got
anticipated.
it.
So it's not like just add stuff to the agenda. I would say if there's an item that you or any other member wants on the agenda, just let me know, and when I put the agenda together, we can add an item.
Thank you.
That's very, very happy to do that, something that people want to talk about. And it's actually important to do that because by the rules of public meetings in Massachusetts, we can't have an extended conversation about something that's not on the agenda, because for all the obvious reasons. Anything else on advisory reports? Okay, so minutes from the October 16th meeting. Thanks to Paul for getting these written up. Sent those around. Unless people have changes to propose, I will not share it up on the screen. Any changes or corrections, edits to propose? Everybody's comfortable with them? Solicit a motion to approve. Thanks, Shelley. Thanks. All right, let's do a roll call and let's come the other way. Doug, start with you. That was an aye, yes, approved?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
Shelley, thanks.
Aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, great. I'm aye as well, so we're 9-0 on the minutes. Great. Okay, so those will get posted, soon. And for anybody who wants to see minutes, right, they're all getting posted on the town's website, so probably tomorrow I'll send them in and they'll probably be posted as have past meeting minutes. Okay, so on to the main topic for this evening. I'm going to suggest we talk about COLA first and then budget guidance. So COLA, right, I mean, it's called a cost of living adjustment, but really, I think the way to think about it is what is the wage or salary adjustment for non-union employees? It essentially amounts to 40-ish. It's, I think, by count, it's 47, but 6 of those people are like doing a contract thing where they're, getting paid $400 to do one thing during the year. And so not really a big deal. It does also cover on-call firefighters. Every percentage point on the COLA amounts to about $29,000. And the standard kind of sequence here is personnel board does kind of their look out at what they see as best they can tell, which is hard to do now, what other towns are doing, what information they have. They saw the same information that we saw at our last meeting. I had sent them a copy of that background material. And then they have that discussion and they make a recommendation. And as the material I sent around early this morning, their recommendation was somewhere in a range of 2.4 to 2.6. I was at their meeting and I would say I was at that part of their meeting. I would say they were heavily influenced by what will be the COLA for Social Security in January, which is 2.5, which is based on a formula of what happened to the consumer price index kind of over the past year. And I think they were heavily influenced by that as kind of a focal point and something that they thought was reasonable and defensible. We get their recommendation. We can then set whatever we want in terms of what will go into the budget that gets presented to the town at town meeting. And again, union employees, which would be police, DPW, and school employees, both Pine Hill and at the region, those are all union contracts. So their wage adjustments are as specified in those union contracts. As we talked about last week, right, comparisons are hard because those union contracts have a thing called COLA, but they may also have a whole set of other provisions that create salary increases with steps, lanes for the schools, merit adjustments and a whole host or additional education adjustments and a whole set of things that can make average wage increases more than the COLA. In town, employees get COLA and there is a relatively small longevity benefit that people get, but that's it. So we don't, Sherborn does not do merit pay. It does not have steps, lanes, or other kinds of adjustments for employees. It's really, other than the small longevity bonus, it's just COLA. So my hope is tonight we can talk about what we think would make sense. Hopefully there's a consensus or at least a majority view. And then we take a vote. If we can get to a number, then I will, over the next week, draft text of a guidance letter, which I will send around ahead of time. And it would include that number for COLA and also the number I'm hoping we can set tonight for budget guidance with a bit of kind of language around that, maybe summarizing bits of our conversation and a bit of context for, how we sort of settled on the number that we settled on. So that being said, that backdrop, we open the floor for comments about what people think would be sensible. Laura?
I was just curious if in the meeting, they shared at all what they discovered about what other towns are doing.
Yeah, so qualitatively, not quantitatively. And the reason for that is other towns are sort of at the same stage we are, which is thinking about it, but decisions haven't been made. So everyone is kind of looking around thinking who's doing what, and nobody's done anything yet. I would say a fair summary would be their impression is that other towns kind of surrounding us, peer towns, are sort of seeing the same focal point of the Social Security COLA. And that's been sort of the focal point. But I think that is a qualitative read rather than they actually have numbers. What else? Thoughts? Just going to open this up. We can also just spin around if everybody wants to offer a view. But Stephen, if you want to start.
Does the personnel board also get input from town management?
So tell me what you're thinking by that.
Just some feedback on impact on morale, sense of fairness, expectations.
So I think they are hearing a fair bit of that. My impression, Jeremy, Deb, you may be able to add some color to this. My impression is it's informal, but people are certainly talking to them. People are certainly talking to me. So I'm hearing things too, and I'm pretty certain that the personnel board is getting that kind of informal feedback as well.
Yeah, or characterize it as informal. It's not a specific formal process.
And
Well, I'm stating something everybody knows, but I do want to say that, every time we set the COLA increase, that's a new floor going forward. And I would, remember last year, I think the range from the personnel board was like 3 to 3.5, and Social Security was 3 to 2. And I thought we should go, Social Security is a defensible number, and I believe we went with the high, I think with 3.5, I think we went the high end of their range. I think this year I would sort of circle back to my position last year and go with 2.5 as Social Security. It's in the middle of their range. And it's also, as we say, a defensible number. It's a number we can, if somebody in town said 2.5, yeah. If somebody said that, a taxpayer said to me, why'd you pick that? And say, well, that's what Social Security did. And I think you mentioned that actually the federal employees are getting 2%.
yeah, I mean, that's what the president proposed. It's not done yet because Congress will wait until
So
December or something to actually figure it out. But yeah, that's,
I don't think any of us want to do that, but I think,
Yeah.
or maybe, I don't want to speak about this. I'm not proposing to that.
Yeah.
But I think 2.5
Okay.
is in the middle of their range, and it's defensible.
okay. Okay, others? People want to react to Penn's comments of either,
I'm in agreement with this
So-
line
so-
of
so-
thinking.
yeah,
I'm
okay.
in agreement.
sounds about right or doesn't?
I actually wrote the same thing down, like, when I looked at it 2 weeks ago, I was kind of at 2.5 myself, so.
Okay.
Great minds, Laura. Great minds think alike.
Yeah. This is like, yeah, hang on, I just wanted to finish, give everybody here a chance. Nora, my thoughts, reactions to that?
I'm just curious, where there were comments about informal comments being made. Is it possible to get a sense for what those informal conversations might have? I mean, I don't want to ask
I
who
can-
said anything, but like,
I can say a little about what I've heard, which, I'm reminded frequently that, in town, the COLAs all employees get. And that is different than other towns that, have some version of merit pay or some differences in the pay structure, which makes the comparisons, if the personnel board calls up another town and says, oh, what's your COLA this year? They'll give a number. But then if you look at what's the average wage increase, it might be different for that reason. So I'm frequently reminded of that. And I frequently hear comments, not necessarily about a specific person in position, but about, morale, retention, and effects on that of, if there were a COLA that was widely perceived as unfair, gosh, that would have implications. So those are the kinds of comments that have come to me, and I presume similar ones to the personnel board. Nora?
I'm just curious about longevity pay. What's the exposure there?
Oh, most of the people that were getting a high longevity pay have left. So, and I think when we passed it, we thought the worst case was going to be $10,000 a year. That
In total.
in total.
Yes, I know.
Right.
For everybody. And
Right.
now, probably this year will be $7,500.
Okay.
In total. And that's over.
And it's,
Average over 15 employees, so.
And the highest you can get is 1,000.
it's like 250, 500, 1,000, depending on years of service. And Deb, you had a comment, please. Is that right? Yeah, oh, okay. Deb, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, going along with Social Security is fine when the numbers are reasonable. And Dan, I don't know if you remember in the personnel board, they said, yeah, we go along with social security, except for the year that they got an 8% increase and we got 4.5. So the employees here will never make up for that if we continue to go along with that.
Yeah, that was a tough year.
Yeah, it was a tough year, but
Yep.
you know, we never recovered. Insurance rates are going up about 10%. We met with our insurance agents, you know, and we should budget 7 to 15%. So she said, probably for sure, we're in 10%. So employees who are receiving a 2.5% increase barely covers the insurance cost of health insurance increase.
Because the 10% hits both the town's share and the employee's share. So, yeah, okay. So there's a bit more, very direct feedback. Stephen?
I think perhaps another thing to consider, and I'm not questioning your logic on the 2.5%, is that's a national number. And I don't know if New England, Massachusetts in particular, has a higher cost of living or experienced a higher cost of living rate increase than national average.
So, a few numbers on that. So it's a little bit tricky because the regional or local numbers can tend to be volatile. So over the year through September, the price indexes for Boston, Cambridge, Newton went up more than the national average. But then the prior year, they went up less by about the same amount. So if you average through the last 2 years, it's about the same. But if you, wanted to focus specifically on the last year, prices went up more here. And this has to do with the mix of, if you think about people's consumption bundles, stop. I'm slipping into econ.
Keep going.
Let me just stop. Let me just catch myself. If you think about, families' budget shares, housing rent is one item that has increased particularly rapidly in the Boston area, but also budget shares for housing are larger here than in many other parts of the country. So if that's an item that's been going up a lot and there's a bigger budget share here, that's going to push, numbers up. Last year, there was something different going on and it went the other way. And I tried to get out of my econ geek speak thing. One could point to that and say, maybe that would be a reason to do more, but then probably last year we should have done less. Well, unless someone has more to add, it felt like that's pretty much of a consensus view. So motion to,
I'll say, I feel like an outlier, but
go ahead.
I feel like 2.5 is low.
Okay.
For me.
Okay.
And for a lot of the reasons that have been expressed, that it is the only increase that the town employees receive. I feel like something more like a 3.5 would be a little fairer to them. It's still less than what the union employees, I believe. I mean, I'm not looking at all the numbers, but I feel like pretty confident that it's a little bit less than what a lot of the union employees are receiving in the same year. So I feel like 3.5 would be more fair to everybody's family incomes, but that might be an unpopular view. I don't know, but
No, it's good that you put that out there. So, reactions to that?
I think it varies. There's going to be a range in those numbers, so I don't.
So I think I missed it.
I said, do we know what the union employees increase is from the?
What's in the CBAs? Hard to.
I think the only one that's currently negotiated is the teacher's contract, and I don't recall. We're talking about FY '26, so we're starting in July. The Public Works CBA, police CBA are currently unsettled for that time period. I don't have numbers for you there.
you know what it was last year?
What's that?
Do we have a sense of what it was last year?
The Public Works CBA last year was 2%. They had a series of 3 years, 2%. I don't recall what the police.
The other thing that makes those comparisons challenging is because those typically are 3-year contracts. So, some of them, like police, at 2%, 2%, 2%, when inflation was really going up a lot.
Yeah,
So
I know
then-
that's the Public Works. contract.
Public Works,
I don't
yeah.
recall
Okay,
what-
thank you. And so then, new contract negotiation, they're looking for some catch up because they're not doing adjustment every year. So
I see.
again, the timing matters. Doug,
On this
go ahead.
topic, who are the unionized groups? Teachers, police,
And DPW.
DPW? So for each of those, I know we're not doing that, who negotiates with those unions to work on their contracts?
The Public Works Union and the Police Union is the select board, and the Teachers Union is the superintendent of schools and the school committees.
Typically, though, there's typically a representative from the select boards in both Dover and Sherborn who participate in that. Yeah.
So the school committee representation, from the select board does the teachers.
With one representative, I mean, it's a relatively small percentage of the vote.
Yeah, so the point is they see what's going on and have a vote, but they don't control.
Correct.
And who does the police?
The select board.
And is it annual?
They're generally 3-year.
3 years out. So just this, to build on the last point, I think it'd be helpful to just understand what have those contracts done over the last 5 or 6 years or whatever?
Yeah.
Be useful information to have for this and next year's conversation.
Yeah, so I think in broad terms, up until kind of inflation hit, everything was around 2%. The COLAs. And I think in the last school contract, I think the COLA was around 3%. So last year, I think, so fiscal 25, I think the COLA was around 3%, but salary increases were more because of steps and lanes and other features. I think that's
Once
roughly how the numbers.
finalized, those collective bargaining agreements are posted on the town
Yeah.
website, so they are publicly available.
I had looked through all of those a few weeks back, but I don't remember all the numbers now.
I had a question.
Yeah,
Oh, sorry. Mike.
go ahead.
Is there any way that in lieu of, say, if it was at 2.5, to negotiate kind of creatively with the employees for, extra days off, something like that? I mean, what are the average days off or vacation days for full-time versus part-time? I'm assuming, obviously holidays. Is that
It
something?
varies for part-time. Some part-time employees are not benefit eligible, so they
Mhm.
don't have sick days or vacation. Some are benefit eligible. And it's sort of a ratio of the hours they worked towards a full-time employee, is what they accrue. The personal administration plan really set for those benefits. Between 1 to 4 weeks of vacation is what's allowed in the personal administration plan based on year of service.
Yeah, I don't mean to put a personnel board hat on. I'm just, because I don't own one, but just curious if that's something. To think about.
Well, I do think it would take the personnel, you'd have to vote at town meeting to change the personnel bylaw plan. It's not.
Yeah, I was just curious.
Yeah,
you know.
I think it's a process. I don't think that it's something that, it's not like a corporation where you can just do that. It's a community, so it has to be voted on. And it
Right.
would take at least.
There's no merit or steps built into the personnel administration.
Okay, thank you.
So I was going to come back on Mike's comment. So I'm, on the one hand, I'm sympathetic to that and this for all the reasons that you said. I'm also mindful of, Penn talked about the budget, the police dispatch issue. I think there are a number of other hits to the budget that I think is gonna make it, I think, a challenging type budget year. Don't want to lay all that on the backs of town employees. But it sort of pushes me back to thinking about what would be a sort of defensible number that sort of matches where, sort of other people are, and that at least brings me back to sort of where Penn started. You know, completely understanding I think, the reasons behind your suggestion.
Well, and also, not only are they not receiving the merit increase over the COLA, but also, as was mentioned, the added insurance cost.
Yep.
I cringe at the idea that
Yep.
it's already been communicated to town management that there's some anticipatory displeasure about.
Yeah.
So,
And I just looked at the current police CBA.
Oh, thanks,
contract,
great.
Which turns out in June of.
This is the last year.
This is the
Yep.
last year, 3 years, 2%, just like.
Yep, okay. With some additional features that
Yeah.
could have made wage
There's-
increases
there's
higher than
differential,
2%.
There's other things.
Right.
in there.
Right.
And-
They obtain overtime. It's the folks you're talking about.
was 4.5, 4.2.
I think last year, right, it was 4 something, with a
Yeah.
COLA of 3,
Year of a 3-year.
right,
That was kind of the number that I was thinking. when
Yeah,
it said,
okay.
Yeah,
okay.
this is halfway between 2.5 and where the teachers union is, so. But again, might be unpopular, so.
It will be, yeah.
Depends on who you ask.
Yeah,
Right.
exactly. I was just thinking the same, thing.
I'm just kind of curious why the personnel board, who probably knows about the insurance increase, why the recommendation where what's being recommended, like what seems to be popular is the 2.5%, but that's like right squarely in the middle of what they're very tight ranges, and if they knew that, why weren't they presenting us with a higher upper end of the range? So I do feel like last year when we voted on this 3.5, that felt like we were being generous. We went above. Like, but there's not, I mean, what Mike's proposing is significantly above like what their
Right,
range is.
Right.
Which I personally find hard to justify because it's not even within the range of the personnel
Yep.
department that has more insight into
Yep.
this. Like, I'm curious why they wouldn't propose a higher range,
So
understanding that and maybe that being their justification for it.
so I was just gonna say, and then I'll get to you, Jeremy, that they talked about that. They
Okay.
talked about a higher range and then concluded that,
It was a unanimous decision and the letter that we got said unanimously, they said to
yeah,
point forward to
it was unanimous. They had a conversation about that. They considered some higher numbers and then concluded this was where they thought it ought to.
Okay.
Jeremy?
Yeah, to be fair to the personnel board, those insurance numbers that Deb mentioned came to us after.
After, okay, that's what I'm trying to understand a little bit. I thought, so I guess my question is like, if they knew it, why would they recommend a higher number?
In their defense, we didn't have those numbers.
Okay, that's helpful to know.
By the school contract level as well. It was at 3 years at 2.75% for COLA teachers' contract.
And with some additional
Steps.
steps and ways and so on. Yep.
Thank you.
Stephen?
I think perhaps one could look at gross pay as one element of a total compensation that an employee receives. So when you add in all things like potential more vacation pay because they're here longer, so instead of 3 weeks, they're getting 4 weeks. They have a gross pay, they have health insurance benefit, there may be other benefits as well that they get that I can't enumerate, whether it be unemployment or disability insurance, or all the other things that go into a compensation package. I think it's probably more than 2.5% increase when you look at all the elements combined.
I mean, if you think about the cost of the town, on the health insurance piece, the cost of the employees will go up probably something in the neighborhood of 10%, as Deb mentioned. That also means that the town's contribution, and the town pays a significant chunk of that, is likely to go up by a lot. The town is also making payments for retiree healthcare. And again, as I mentioned, I think it's going to be a complicated budget year. So there were federal legislative changes that shifted some costs from Medicare to private insurance. So I think the estimate is that retiree health insurance costs are going to go up about 20%. So there's another, hit to the town's budget. It's also the case that there's some large properties in town that shifted from being tax status to being non-tax status. So for example, Milburn Farm, which was purchased by the trustees. So that's a significant chunk of tax revenue that's going to disappear. So I think when these things come together, just in terms of background and context, we'll see in January when we get a roll up. But I think it will turn to be a pretty tight budget year.
So I'm advocating closer to the 2.5% than the 3.5%.
I had so we can keep going. I'm happy to keep going, though. I had a sense that there's maybe not unanimous, but a general consensus around 2.5%. Happy to keep talking about it, but if that's right, if somebody wants to, make a motion and go in that direction, we can do that. Or if people want to keep talking about it, we can do that too.
I make a motion. You can help me out here.
That the advisory
That advisor
proposes a
proposes a
COLA of 2.5%. If that was what you wanted to say.
That was what I wanted to say. Thank you. So I make a motion that advisory proposes a COLA of 2.5%.
Okay. Any further discussion on that motion? Then let's vote. And let's start over here. Stephen.
Aye.
Penn.
Aye.
Paul.
Aye.
Aye.
Laura.
Nay.
Okay. Get that over to Laura.
Aye.
Joe. Aye. And I'm aye as well. So we've got 8-1. Okay, very good. All right. Thanks, everybody. I think that was good, at least from my vantage point, except when I slipped into geek land. It was a good conversation. Yeah, Penn.
Can I make a sort of quick post-vote comment
Sure.
on this topic?
Sure.
One of the things I find frustrating that we're in the position dealing with I think a weakness that's in the town setup. I think it would be, I don't know how this would work, but I think it'd be better if there were merit pay, if there were something more individualized, because what we do here, on the one hand, if we're trying to look at, as Mike said, is trying to be fair and things like that, it's not what we're tasked to do. We're tasked to assign a COLA, and we're sort of changing the parameters. And I'm very sympathetic to that, but I feel like, we're sort of in the position of, it's a blunt tool to to cover over or fix a problem that should be addressed at a structural level.
So I'll just say that I share that view. My view would be that what we would be setting would be something like a compensation budget, and some part of it might be like a base pay increase, and some part might be then a merit pay increase. That's been talked about in the town before. There's been, I think, there's considerable opposition to that from some quarters. And that, I think, picking up on what Deb said also, would require, I think, a change in the personnel plan and probably a bylaw change, and would need to go to town meeting. So, that isn't something that we can do, here and now in these meetings. We're sort of given a structure, which, as you say, has some limitations. But, I've said that before in public meetings, that that would be my sense, but that's not the world that we're in right now.
I understand that. I'm just sort of venting.
Yeah.
So picking up on that, what do other towns do? Are we right down the fairway? This is what everyone in Massachusetts does? Is it?
It's a good question. Jeremy, do you have any insight into that? I assume it's kind of a mix.
It varies. widely. Medfield, for instance, actually does have steps for these sorts of employees, even though they're not in a union. They do have a pay plan that has
Based on things like
steps
tenure or
based on
performance?
tenure. Natick, the town I was just previously in, did have a merit pay system. So they had, you know, as Dan mentioned, a portion was a COLA that sort of applied across the board, but then there was a merit-based system, so based on performance. A set budget was then distributed based on merit. So it varies. It varies greatly.
Just say that once you start having a merit, so once you start having merit component of it, it's not as simple as just sort of putting the merit component onto it. You have to come up with a whole set of metrics to
Absolutely.
assess merit. I mean, it's really
Absolutely.
a pretty complicated thing and can also generate dissatisfaction, working at a company that has a big component of merit pay. So, I guess, you know, that was just one reaction I had, but the other one,
And there's been plenty of opposition for that reason and other reasons.
Yeah.
That is one of the reasons that, you know. it is-
But I was
it is the way
curious.
it is.
you know, in terms of our role as the advisory committee, do we have any standing to propose even a change or, I guess, a
You can
review? or
certainly
anything?
share your view to the
Okay, but not to the
personnel.
advisory committee, it's more as like individual citizens of the town. Is that-
I mean, we
I
could,
mean, in both cases.
yeah, yeah. I mean, we could, I think, want to add it as an agenda item to,
Yeah.
have a full-fledged discussion. But, we certainly could do that. And if as a committee, we want to make a recommendation to the personnel board that they begin a process of
Okay,
going
so
down
that's
that
how we
road.
do that.
We certainly could do that. And if there's sentiment to do that, we should add it as an agenda item and sort of tee up some, appropriate background info that might inform that discussion. I worked in an agency in the federal government that shifted from not having performance pay to having performance pay to not having performance pay. And now they're probably on the verge of, thinking about shifting back because whatever world they're in, everybody thinks the other world is the better place to be. So I've seen much of the tension around it that, there's public sector around the private, but much of the tension around it, I think the same kind of tension you were describing.
Grass is always greener.
Yeah. Okay, Stephen.
Just a reminder, was there, did we have some discussion about a benchmarking program where,
Yes.
right, so if the compensation is way off, it's going to come out as a result of this benchmarking study?
Yeah, I think it will, yeah. So the select board did commit funds from the federal ARPA funds to hire a consultant to do that.
Right.
Benchmarking, if you will. Basically develop a classification compensation plan for us that will classify positions and look at the market and
Right.
it won't lead immediately to any additional costs for salary, but it will or may indicate where positions are in the benchmark, low, high,
Right,
what have you.
right. Okay, that's going to be very helpful.
Yeah, it will.
Yeah, so I mean, that's probably 4 or 5 months out before having that information.
And that's happening as a result of a state mandate that requires the town to do something like that.
So we'll be getting some feedback.
Just for clarification for the minutes, Deb, I had written down here, every percentage point on the COLA amounts to around 29,000. So then we go 2.5. So just, that's generally based on what we have now, right? Okay, thank you. And then we were on the longevity pay, it was about 10,000, but with some people leaving and whatnot, it's going to be projected this year around probably 7,500. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, so then that's one key number for our guidance letter. The other number would be budget guidance for non-salary parts of department budgets. As we talked about last meeting, for a long expanse of years, I don't know exactly how far back. Advisory's guidance has been flat budget, so no, guidance being no change. And if there are, significant cost pressures that make it impossible to provide an appropriate level of services with a flat budget, then come to advisory and explain that. And, we would have a conversation, then about and around that. So, the maybe easy option would be to say, yeah, we've done that in the past. That's worked okay. Let's do that again with flat guidance. We could also do something different. So, the hope is tonight we can have a conversation about that and come up with a number so that we can, have something to craft a letter around. So thoughts on that? Ken, you want to start us off?
Well, I'm gonna start with the question. So if and I'm gonna phrase this, I'm sure poorly, but basically there was a lot of money left, a certain amount of money left over last year, like unspent, about, is that a little over 2%?
About that. About that.
Okay. So so we could, given that, sort of in theory, notch below flat.
Yeah, of course. Certainly could. The money that, that isn't spent rolls over into free cash. So
Right.
it's not like the money disappears,
No, I'm not
I'm not
suggesting that, so it's actually there to be spent as
Yeah.
well, so.
Yeah. A significant chunk of that, and I think there's going to be some more analysis of kind of by department where things were under, over, and I think we're going to get some more analysis on that. But a significant chunk of it was unfilled positions.
Mhm.
So if we're really to say, let's just drop it down, that would be equivalent to saying unfilled positions will not be filled. Which could be done, but that would have some obvious consequences. Since I think, the expectation, that would have obvious consequences. And I think that was a significant chunk of, it wasn't the only thing, but I think that was a significant chunk of what accounted for that. And I think, as I said, I think been some conversations between me and Jeremy and Deb, and I think there's be some more analysis that will get done to, help us understand what factors, in addition to unfilled positions, what were the factors that were behind that? Go ahead.
So not making a recommendation, but the thing we talked about last year, and keep in mind is that, and you and I have talked about this, is, we've been flat, our guidance has been flat for quite a while, but we allow exceptions.
Right.
And then those become the floor for the next year. So there's, and some of those exceptions are things that are permanent. Like some costs go up permanently, others like fuel costs cycle back down. So the problem is there's no mechanism for going back.
Right.
For,
Right.
To claw back the raise for.
Yeah.
Not the amount given, but the amount allowed for extraordinary expenses.
So I think there are kind of two mechanisms that I would, or maybe even three mechanisms that I think can in part deal with that.
Mhm.
One is, one would hope that department heads would be mindful of that, and that if it was a one-off thing, they wouldn't find a way to slip that in. But if they did, Jeremy and Deb do a review of all those budgets before they come to us, and I think they would identify many of those things. And those budgets then do come to us, and I think then it becomes our job. And I think this is where if department liaisons can spend some time digging into budgets to really try to understand the budget, in a bit of detail, then when we have that conversation here at advisory, we're the ones who can say, hey, that seems like a one-time expense. Why isn't that coming out of the budget? And I think, budget liaisons can be particularly helpful in that, and all the rest of us too. I think in my mind, it would be hard to put a number on, that on average, the one-time things were X, so let's have budgets come down by X, because, well, maybe those one-time things were in this department, but not that department, and so kind of a broad brush would not be as effective as trying to dig in and figure out where are those things to be able to talk with those budget makers and say, hey, that was a one-off thing, particularly for those of us who participated in that conversation, those conversations last year. Hey, that was a one-off thing, shouldn't that come out this year?
Right.
Stephen?
This is for me, a difficult question to answer without understanding some, or seeing some sensitivity analysis. And how I mean that is, let's say hypothetically, the goal was to not increase the tax rate by more than 1%. Then we know certain elements of the budget, school, 60%, probably have an idea as to what that number is going to be. There are other fixed costs, insurance, pension benefits, et cetera.
Yeah.
So then we kind of have to back into what that number is, as opposed to say just flat, because maybe it's minus 10%. I don't know. So to say what I think the guidance is I'm not sure I know what the guidance is.
Yeah.
If that's a fair
Yeah.
approach to solving the problem.
The exact same
Yeah.
issue.
Here's the challenge with our process. The answer to that, question of, where are we? What are the implications for the tax rate? What are the implications for average tax bills? Can't really know until the budget's rolled up and we know, what is it that people want to do? What are the implications of some of these budget hits that I mentioned? And that roll up can't happen until there are actually budget numbers to put together from the schools and from departments, say, here's what it's looking like. It's adding up to this amount of spending, which would imply, given some reasonable estimate of what's going to happen to property values, this is what it would imply for the tax rate. This is what it would imply for average property tax bills. So in January, we'll get a look at that. The challenge is that the start of that process is our providing some guidance to help budget makers put those numbers together. So there's sort of a, chicken and egg issue. That being said, something that I think is really important for the town to do more of than it's done is what I would call long-term financial planning. And I think that is being worked on, Deb and Jeremy, but hasn't been a lot of that that's been done recently. I have a 5-year budget projection spreadsheet that I will spin up and share with people in due course. But, that's a 30,000 foot, not a detailed, super granular view. But with more of that kind of planning, then you could sort of look ahead and say, looking at, FY26 or FY27, given kind of a plausible estimate of spending increases, property taxes, all the other elements that go into the budget, here's kind of where that would land. If that doesn't look very good, then at the beginning of that year, of that planning year, advisory would want to say, hey, we're going to need to be really tight about guidance because we can see we're going to a place we don't want to go. We don't really have that in place. So we're back in this world of chicken and egg with budget makers need some guidance, but until they put budgets together, we aren't going to be able to see the sorts of numbers that you're looking for.
And Stephen, the tax rate, and this is, well, I'm glad Wendy's going to be able to, she's going to finish all of that. It's really what the spending rate is, because whatever we spend, that becomes really the,
Right now, I
right? So,
hear what you're saying. Can I respond to that?
yes,
So I'm looking at it, I'm looking at the cut from the other side. And I'm saying the goal is no greater than 1% increase. As opposed to saying, here's the pot we're gonna spend, that yields a 2.5% increase.
because we're not getting any growth, we don't have any more money coming in from other sources, really.
Stephen, were you saying like on the tax rate or on tax bills? When you said 1%?
Just a point of clarification, Madam Makers. Prop 2.5 says we can't increase the rate 2.5%, more than 2.5% a year, or the bill 2.5%.
So it's a little complicated. Prop 2.5 says that the overall, Prop 2.5 sets a limit, it's like a ceiling. And that ceiling is a ceiling on the overall tax levy, total number of dollars collected in property tax by a town. Yep.
So
Yep.
if the town collects $1,000, you can't increase it by more than 2.5% the next year.
with,
dollars you're collecting.
yes, but with a couple important exceptions.
Yeah, like the CPA.
Which is, right, so there's a ceiling. And if because of past spending decisions, let's suppose the town is 5% below that ceiling. Well, that ceiling is gonna go up 2.5%. But if the town is starting out with a levy that's 5% below the ceiling, well, then the taxes could go up more than 2.5%. Because until you hit the limit, you can keep going. When you hit the limit,
So if we increase our taxes for the next 10 years,
so
we have
so
a
the ceiling,
25%
the ceiling,
cushion.
yeah, the ceiling is what Prop 2.5 is really defining. And so there's a ceiling, and if the town has been spending beneath the ceiling, then the town has what's called excess levy capacity, which is the ability to raise taxes more than 2.5%, the overall levy more than 2.5%, because, you're below the ceiling. The idea, I think, that legislators had in mind when they passed Prop 2.5 was to prevent towns from getting too high. It wasn't from any given year, you can only go up 2.5%. It's much more involved than that. And that ceiling adjusts by new growth. So if there's new construction in town, then that expands the town's tax capacity and the ceiling goes up. If there's an override, that would raise the ceiling. And then also if the town issues debt that is exempt from Prop 2.5, then the debt service for the time that that debt is being paid off also raises the ceiling. So it's much more involved than just property taxes can't go up more than 2.5%. There are limits, but it's a pretty complicated formula. And I've got some stuff I can send you if you want to know more about that.
And while Wendy is here, I suggest you go in and speak with her. She's
Yeah.
great at explaining it and.
The reason I asked based on Steve's questions is at some point, there's a limit, right?
There is.
So we're giving advice to,
So,
departments. There is a state imposed limit at some point, there's a ceiling,
There is.
right? So it's
Absolutely.
like, we might say zero, no, nothing, or we might
So-
say 2.5%, but it's gonna
So-
be limited ultimately by
Yeah.
Prop 2.5.
yes, yes. So let's just do a scenario. Let's suppose we get to January, and this is not a prediction. I'm just doing hypotheticals. But let's suppose we get to January and the budget roll up would imply a tax levy that would be above the state's limit.
Yes,
Then the town would have a choice, either go to the voters and ask for an override or trim the budget. And it would be, I think, a really important part of our job in advisory, starting in January, to come to a view of, do we think that
is it
the
warranted?
level of services warrant asking for an override, or do we want to go back to budget makers and say, oops, this isn't going to work, budgets need to be adjusted in this way by this amount? And that would be a really important part of our work
That's
in the winter.
But back to Steve's point, I'm gonna guess a huge percentage of the town budget is essentially fixed. I'm thinking like teachers' contracts.
It is,
Like,
it is.
so are we really talking about, I don't even know, but are we really talking about like 14% of the budget that's variable? I mean, like, what is there? You got a lot of nuts here.
So,
It's about 20%.
20%,
so,
okay.
so there are different ways to do the adding up. But if you say schools are 60%, and then you do, I think if you do on Deb's point of what's fixed and variable, you come up with that number. If you want to do it by department or function, say schools are 60%, then let's talk about fire, ambulance, police, DPW, debt service, insurance. That's about another 30%. And so what's left is about 10%. Part of that 90% is variable costs, because within the police department or fire department, they're variable costs. But, I think police, ambulance, fire, DPW, I think those are seen by many people in town as core services, schools too. So, yeah, it gets challenging.
That's why growth is important.
Yeah. Penn,
So,
I'm sorry. Oh, go ahead, Penn, and then we'll come to Jeremy. Go ahead.
yeah, so partly a little more venting, but I feel like, it's my second year advisor, and I feel like we're presented with a piece of equipment and it's got these parts are screwed on with screws and these are, Alan had these nuts, and we open our toolbox and it contains 6 hammers and a chisel. It's sort of like the COLA thing. We feel like we're presented with fairly blunt approaches to this. And I would just throw this out there as a sort of a starting point. If we're looking at, I think we're looking at a tough year in terms of costs coming in. Things that and we're limited in, so we've got those things facing us. I think we could, maybe with some justification, look at the 2+% left over and say, okay, we're going to ask everybody for a 1% cut in their budget. And then I don't want to say duke it out because I don't want it to be an adversarial process, but just really drill in with budget makers and be aware that they're probably going to need flex. They might have flex going down, they might need flex going up. I'm not saying we should make a fight out of it as we work through liaison and work through it, advisory as a whole, because my impression is that, people in town, budget makers are very conscientious in general and efficient and work hard. So I'm not trying to, so let's make a fight about it. But if we keep raising the floor and we've done that, and there seems to be a little, I don't have a lot of experience, but it doesn't seem like there's a lot of fallback from the previous year historically. We could say, look, we have an opportunity because there's, 2.5, not 2.5, but 2% surplus, for lack of a better, if that's the right term. Let's just set a new floor this year and then be prepared in good faith to work with, the budget makers, because I think they work with us in good faith. And I think if we say, look, really look at your budgets, let's just really sort of see where we can, if we can trim, we can trim. And if we don't need to, we don't have, if we can't, then we won't. And if there's extra you need, then we can look at that.
And grants.
So
Sure.
if 60% is schools or teacher salaries or whatever, round numbers, it's a lot. That's already baked, right? We're not affecting, it's a union contract.
The union contracts we can't affect.
So, is there some percentage of the school budget that's like paper and crayons that we can affect? Like, in other words, how much of the budget, by saying, hey, we don't want you to increase your budget, well, how much of it is already baked in the cake?
And when the school budgets are presented to you, they're presented to you from the school committee. So with your budget guidance that you're handing out tonight, doesn't necessarily apply.
That's my, I'm asking, like, what is this?
So your guidance for handing out is for the municipal departments.
So is the guidance we're getting, what I'm trying to get at is our guidance really for the, whatever, 10%, 20%, whatever? That's a small percentage, and they're the ones whose office is gonna get toured every year
So
because
it's police,
we don't wanna increase.
it's police, fire, DPW, everybody else in town hall. And, it's those departments and the parts, the non-salary parts of those departments. That's really who this applies to.
Is it everything but schools, basically?
Pretty much.
The other thing to consider with the schools, we say that 60%, there's shared budgets where the health insurance that we're talking about, the 10% covers the elementary school teachers. That's in the municipal budget, not part of that 60% you mentioned. So the true cost of all the other indirect stuff is for the schools is higher than that 60%. The benefit costs are carried in a shared budget. A lot of what you're talking about now is sort of the guidance of what you're looking for overall. Are you projecting out to town departments that want to see what, more or less level service and see what that's going to cost when it gets all rolled up? When you see the roll up, then you can start drilling in. The benefit of the roll up before you make any votes on any departments is you see how it all fits together. And so you'll have that roll up at the end of December. After Div and I see them and put it all together, it'll have an estimate of what the tax rate may be. But the tax rate, municipal finance, it's always like a delayed a year. So the tax rate that will be set by the assessors and the tax rate here in December is based on the spending that was voted past spring and the valuations of the properties as well to arrive at your tax rate. I mean, the real better number for you folks is what it actually costs, the actual cost, not the rate per se, but the actual out-of-pocket cost for your tax bill. But it's tough without having to roll up now. You're talking in pretty broad generalities.
I get it that we're not, that this final arbiter, we're advising. So are we effectively advising on a less than 50% of the town budget? Are we not really advising?
Yes.
Yeah,
I'm
so.
just trying to get to like what reality is.
Yeah, so there's kind of, there's kind of de facto and de jure. So by law, we're going to put together a report that will go to town meeting that will include the full omnibus budget, including schools, our, Pine Hill, our contribution to the regional school, and every other department. And, we will make a recommendation, with here's the number, here's the budget that advisory recommends. In terms of de facto, the schools, we could say, and again, hypothetical for anybody listening, this isn't like a recommendation, we could say schools should cut their budget by 5%, and we could recommend that to town meeting. I don't think we'd have much success with that. I think, the town meeting would hear from parents, from, people in town who'd say, schools are such an important asset here. It's ridiculous to cut the budget. You should give them what they want.
I'm not saying this is the case, but if we audited the school budget and said, we see $1 million waste, we could point it out.
Yes. I'm just making the point that the school budget, we're gonna make a recommendation. But there's certain recommendations that we would make that just won't be accepted by the town. Now, on your point, if we identify $1 million in waste, well, advisory committees have done that in the past. There was, 7 or 8 years ago, I don't have the exact timing, people drilled into the school budget and identified something like that amount that they thought really could come out, and made the case, and I think persuaded the school committee and the town that those adjustments should be made. So that's where the work we do in January, both with the schools and with departments, becomes really important. Because that's really the opportunity. We see the roll up, and that's then our opportunity, sort of what are implications for the tax rate and tax bills. And then that's our opportunity to dig in. Again, for the reasons I said, I think the schools are kind of a distinctive thing. And I think because of the structure and the governance structure, we have less ability to, not no ability, but less ability to guide those budgets than the municipal department budgets. Just in terms of the fact as compared to, the kind of.
Thank you.
Other thoughts, reactions?
Did you want us to come up with a plan tonight on what you recommend?
It would
Is
be
that what
really
you-
helpful to come up with a number tonight, because
Okay,
really by next week, we should be finalizing a letter that will then go to all department heads.
Mhm.
Because then they need to put budgets together to, by early December, get to Deb and Jeremy, and then, so they come back to us by end of December. So kind of do need, we really do kind of want to agree on a number tonight.
Well, so back to my original question, if 60% of it is schools, and much of that is baked into like a union contract with their own COLA and blah, blah, blah. Like, we already know the town budget is gonna increase by a certain amount, no matter what the school
Yep.
committee decides to do.
Yep.
Right? It's unlikely the school committee's gonna like renegotiate the contract down, right?
That's not going to happen.
So if I'm making up the number, if the school budget is gonna go up $500,000 this year over what it was last year, we already know that that's headroom we don't have.
Yep.
So is the thinking that we should say, all right, well, what's baked into the cake and say it's $500,000? Let's find $500,000 from everybody else, or tell everyone to be at zero and expect the whole thing to go up to $500,000. Like, I'm not trying to Like, what are we solving?
So in past years, budget guidance was flat. And as you said, the overall town budget wasn't flat.
Of course, not.
For all the reasons you said. And, then I think the question is, were those outcomes in past years acceptable or not acceptable? I think different people would probably have reach just different judgments on that. But absolutely, if we were to recommend flat guidance, the budget isn't gonna be flat.
Understood.
It's just absolutely not. And, to how much it's gonna go up, we'll see in January. There are a whole set of factors that are gonna go in the direction of pushing it up. And, then we see in January, where we land. I think the logic of the flat budget is for that part of the budget, that if there are new things that departments want to do, look for efficiencies and look for, ways to do them without asking for more money. And then I think it does, whether it's 0 or -1 or whatever the number is, really becomes contingent on us or important for us to, do that work in January, February, and March. And if the roll up in January looks like something that we don't think that we're not comfortable with, then, going forward, we need to make that clear to budget makers, in all of our meetings with them. So I'm sensing, right, the discomfort with it's a pretty squishy process because can't see the end point now. And so providing inputs seems challenging without being able to see the end point. But that I think is the world that we're in right now.
Well, but also the lack of comfort I have is that we're essentially saying to a handful of departments and employees, cut 5% or stay at 0, or grow only 1%, or whatever our advice is, but it doesn't apply to most of the budget. So it is what it is, but
Yeah.
it sounds like
Yeah.
that's what we're doing.
Yeah, that's right. I think that's right. Yeah, Laura, go ahead.
Just to say, the part that keeps confusing me is, do we know how much money we have to spend? In other words, that's what we raise in taxes, right?
No, it's completely
It happens the other
balanced.
way around, from my understanding.
We decide what we're gonna spend.
And then we go raise the
and then-
taxes.
Didn't you
yeah.
just say the tax rate got set for this year like a year ago?
The tax rate will be set in December based on what the town voted to spend this past spring.
My impression is the way it works is, Dan, correct me if I'm wrong, is at town meeting, the town approves a budget, I'm making up the number, $33 million. Then, once we have the budget, the tax assessor figures out how to go get that money from the 1,500 houses in town, or businesses, or whoever pays taxes. And for example, if the Millbrook Farm has now been taken out of the tax base, well, there's that much less out there, so everyone's gonna pay a little more.
How much did that, speaking of Millbrook, what was that impact? What was the total amount?
That was a revenue, the change in the property, not just for Millbrook, there was some other properties as well. Changed the revenue, dropped $180,000.
Okay, that's significant, yeah.
Yeah.
So I think it took about, I don't know, a little over 10 million of property value off the overall
Mhm.
property.
So we set
10 cents
tax rate and assessments
Okay,
based on how much money we need,
okay,
based on what we decided to spend as a town.
I see, okay, so it just happens several months after the decision of what we want to spend,
Yeah.
then how we're gonna raise it happens like 9 months later.
With the guardrails of Prop 2.5, as
Okay.
mentioned.
Can I jump in on
I
that?
mean, to slip into Econ Geekland again, the tax rate is kind of a residual. It's the tax rate, it's exactly what Doug said. The
It's a
tax
floor.
rate is set wherever it needs to be so that, given property values, the revenue will be raised to pay for the spending that town meeting approved.
Who decides property value? The assessor?
Is it-
Yeah.
Is this person-
Ultimately, the market sets the value and is based 2 years in arrears. So when you look at 2 years behind, and it's supposed to be the assessor's job is to value all the properties, which are about 1,500 properties in Sherborn residential, to, have those be reflective 2 years behind between, 90, 95% of the market rate. So even though our tax rate's gone down, because up to, I don't know, a couple of years ago it was 20, 3, 4, 5 years ago. Now it's down to 16 something,
Yep.
almost 17.
Yep.
So the property tax rate's gone down, which is, that's great, but our values have gone up. So ultimately, our taxes have gone up dollar wise.
Property taxes, have gone up 3, 4, 5%. in
So
recent
it's
years.
a feel good that our tax rate's down. There are other towns around that we're not the highest tax rate now. But, it's still it's all based on the 33 million a year.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, you just have to have the money, however you get there.
Right.
Exactly.
Yeah,
And if we don't have growth, and if we just lost 180,000, we haven't had any new construction homes, say $1 million home is, that's the assessment is $17,000 a year, or a $2 million home times two. It's just frustrating. And the good thing is, the police department had grants coming in. I forget how much that was last year. But it was significant. So, are there any grants that you see on the horizon coming in?
Certainly, there's many grants that we take advantage of, but nothing that's gonna make a serious dent.
Nothing for like a new car. No.
Case after anything and everything.
Right, right.
Ken, you wanted to get in on
Yeah,
business.
I think, so to Doug's point first, there's a limit on what we can control, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't try to control what we can control. And then I know Dan gave a wonderful presentation last year on, to the Council on Aging where taxes come from. Basically distilled is the town votes on a budget. The town votes on a budget of 33 million, and you happen to own property with an assessed value of, if it equals 1% of the assessed value, you're gonna pay 1% of the budget. It's, tax rate is, floats in there, but basically they take the amount of money we agree to spend and divvy it up among all the assessed values, and everybody gets a chunk proportionate to their size of the assessment.
So 5% cuts.
Well,
I don't like that you're laughing.
Stephen,
just as a back of the envelope computation, if in fact 10% of the budget is variable, so that's about, let's call it 3.5 million, 5% is 175,000. It's just not going to move the needle much.
Is it
Cover that
10%?
shortfall.
Is it 20% or
Cover that
10%?
shortfall.
yeah.
That's a great point.
I mean, the other part of the equation is what it may or may not do to the level of service
Yeah,
around service.
so adding, this isn't gonna happen, anyone's listening, when I propose this, but if we said, all right, you gotta cut it, this variable thing, 20%, so it's meaningful, right? Take whatever that number is out of the budget. Well, it may mean we lay off a third of the police force. What does that mean? Now we don't have police coverage. And so it's a question of the quality, or we don't plow the roads, or something has to give if we're gonna cut these departments. And so ultimately, it's gonna be a debate of like, all right, well, do we wanna not have plowed roads? And all the money spent on schools? Or like, at some point, we're either gonna just have to keep spending more money, or we're gonna have to be able to find savings in all the town budgets, including, school department, which is 60% of the.
Or we
And a
go,
lot of it's capital budget. I mean, for example, we put off doing the tennis courts, so that was put off for a year perhaps. So I think a lot of it comes to capital.
Debt service.
That's really-
right, because of the debt service. Yeah, so
Just like level of service for your operating budget, at some point, you need to determine whether or not you want tennis courts or not.
Mhm.
Then.
yeah. So I was going to say that, one approach that has not been the approach in Sherborn, but that some other towns, I think like Dover take, is their starting point, I think, tends to be to tell budget makers, we want to maintain current services. What would it cost to maintain current services? And then they come up with a budget that does that. We're doing something different, which is saying, here's where we think, we want your budget to land. If you think that's going to, say if it's the flat guidance that's, been done in recent years. if you think that's going to have an adverse effect on the level of services, well, come tell us. But otherwise, see if you can find efficiencies to get your budget fit within that. And there will absolutely be departments who will come with, if whatever that number is, who will come with very compelling reasons why to maintain a reasonable level of service, they need for their budget to increase more than advisory's guidance.
Like Sean's dump truck or snow truck.
Yeah, or gasoline prices went up a ton,
Right.
and asphalt prices went up a ton, and so, if you want to do that stuff, it's just gonna cost more.
So essentially, I'm sorry,
Oh, go ahead, and then I was gonna,
say, so essentially, we ask for level funding, but we allow for level services.
somewhere in between, yeah, that's fair.
Is it ever the case that a department comes and doesn't, they offer a lower budget than they could? We guide for flat, they come in at 2% below because of, does that ever happen?
Question.
Just this last year, we merged two departments and
Yeah.
savings. So
Yeah.
the treasurer and collector's office
that's right.
were merged, and we were able to find some efficiency in labor and expenses. So
So they
yes,
can actually
that was
below
that was a reduction when you compare the combined two together.
So what is the budget
I think-
increase last year?
Yeah, hang on a second. I was just on that point. I was going to say, I think another thing that happens is that a department, wants to do something new or different, and they'll make a case for why that's important, and they will find budget savings elsewhere. So we as advisory could come back and say, love the budget savings, don't do the new thing. That doesn't typically happen, but it could.
Sorry.
As I said, that doesn't typically happen. It could, but that's a type of, that's another way that something like a cutback occurs.
So when I moved to town 18 years ago, I think the town budget was closer to 11 or 12, 15 million something. So it's increased some percentage of the year, probably 3 or 4%. What is it increasing in the last few years?
It's been,
3 or 4%.
I think there was some like recently.
So
yeah, I think,
That'll be in the budget roll-up summary. We'll have that issue for you.
yeah, I didn't review the numbers, so I don't have all the numbers in my head, but as Jeremy said, recently there've been some bigger numbers. I think there was a year that was 5 because, just inflation was 9% and costs went up a lot, and
But
that
to be
was
clear,
what
these
happened.
budget increases don't include, I don't know what the proper word for it is, but like the things that get around 2.5, like all the things we voted on at the town meeting,
Oh,
right?
so
All these unique items like, hey, we need a new dump truck, hey, we need pickleball courts, whatever, all these things are unrelated to the budget. These are like things we're gonna.
two different pieces. There's an operating budget, which is the, $35 million piece, which, pays for current operations. One element in that budget is paying for debt service for prior borrowing. And then, that's coming through, picking up on Nora's point, that's coming through, right, the capital budget and prior year's capital budgets with, what were decisions made about, town buildings, significant renovations to the police station or the library, if I'm allowed to say that. And, the borrowing that happens for those things, then that debt service lands on the operating budget. Complicated with how that works with Prop 2.5, but, the budget we're talking about now, the budget guidance we're talking about now is the operating budget. Capital Budget Committee will do a first round of look at capital requests. We'll do a second round look at capital requests. And we as advisory will make recommendations on every proposed capital item, as will the Capital Budget Committee.
So for example, if next year, I don't even know what it is, the library committee, somebody comes back and says, we want $1 million to build this museum in the basement.
Yeah.
That's a capital expenditure that's gonna be funded with
Debt, probably.
and then the 20 grand a year or whatever
Yep.
it is, debt service
Yep.
goes into the operating.
Correct. Yep.
Got it.
Yep. That's exactly right. So I'm gonna, on Penn's suggestion of -1, I'm gonna play devil's advocate and just push back a little bit and make a pitch for flat guidance. So here's my concern. Your kind of starting point was quite appropriately that, there was about a 2% excess of money that was budgeted, meaning people were taxed to pay it, that wasn't spent. And that, raises the obvious issue or concern that maybe we should be, budgeting less and taxing less. Here's what I think the challenge is. A chunk of that is unfilled positions, which are scattered in different departments. If, a decision was made not to fill those positions, then that department's budget obviously should come down. If we're thinking that those are positions that, ultimately should be filled, then probably don't want to pull that money out of the budget. And because those things are spread in a particular way in different departments, if you do a blanket across the board cut, it's going to land on departments that didn't spend all their money last year. It's also going to land on departments that did spend all their money last year and maybe faced a lot of pressures. So it, to me, seems like a pretty broad brush for trying to do a budget reduction as compared to, I think when we get, and again, this is the awkward timing, it'd be better if we had this analysis, sooner. But when we get more analysis of kind of by department or by project and a bit more detail on where were the, spending overages and where were the spending underages last year, then I think that would help us focus on, well, here's a department that didn't spend everything that was budgeted last year, not a vacant position in that department. Maybe that department really should be looking at a cut. But here's another department that has a vacant position and they actually, had a lot of other budget pressures. So I'm just not sure that the -1 everywhere isn't going to cause some issues with, kind of interfering with sort of what we would all think of, or I probably think of as a reasonable level of service, because it's going to land in some of the wrong places. So I'd be more comfortable, I think, with kind of a flat guidance, and then based on analysis that we're going to see, refine that as appropriate and needed, come January, we start reviewing budgets. So
it'll be some departments whereby our guidance for them after we see their budget will be to actually reduce their budget.
So,
Even though we've guided that they can keep it flat, what they present to us, we might look at it and say, actually, looking through this.
yeah.
And that happens, okay, how does that conversation go?
Yeah, so let me start and then Jeremy can jump in. I can see you coming out of your chair there. So let me just start. So, right, we're gonna, that whole series of meetings scheduled January, February, March, we're gonna meet with every budget maker. They're gonna come, they're gonna, have presented their budget, and then we're gonna have a conversation about that. And that conversation can go in many directions. It can go in a direction of budget looks good. And at those meetings, we don't take any votes. All of our votes happen at our public hearing in March. This is just a conversation. Those conversations go, looks good, no one has any concerns. Those conversations go in a direction of, well, we really have some concerns. It looks to us like, this item could be reduced. This is spending that doesn't seem essential. If you're looking for a favorable recommendation from advisory, rather than having advisory recommend something different than what the budget makers want, you might want to make some adjustments. And then there might typically be a bunch of kind of side conversations between liaisons and departments to sort of work out what that might look like. And then there might be some weeks later, well, here's a revised budget. So that absolutely can happen, does happen, should happen. And that would really be our opportunity to, do some of the kinds of things that Penn is talking about.
And that's even if they met the flat guidance?
Yes,
Okay.
yes. Now, there can be some, there can be some, I would say, frustration among budget makers, because they say, hey, I met flat guidance, why are you guys giving me, why are you guys, giving me a hard time about this? But, that's the way the process goes, and that's our job
Okay.
to do that.
That's
And
right,
it's
yeah.
particularly important because we have this odd timing thing where we need to settle on a number for budget guidance to put in a letter that's gonna go out in early November before we've answered all the questions that people have been asking. Jeremy, go ahead, please.
Yeah, I was just gonna note that you'll see that, some of the more significant budget cuts are from changing the way things are done. Like combining two departments, treasurer collector, was a significant savings, but that wasn't keeping status quo, that was changing the way things are done. There's certainly opportunities when positions are vacant or when you have willing partners to share positions, like cross your fingers, hopefully our sustainability department will have a shared person with Alston, and in the FY26 budget, you'll see a reduction as a result of that. There's opportunities, conservation, other shared services, maybe in the Board of Health, the regional Board of Health, but that all, in some ways, is beyond advisory and gets into the operations of the community more under maybe the select board or the boards that have authority over the operations of the department. So that can be a challenge for you folks.
Yeah, I'll stop. Pat, go ahead.
But I don't play devil's advocate to your devil's advocate.
I expected you would.
And I think, if we, so we're sort of, the thing is, it's, it's a broad brush or blunt instrument, depending on how you look at it. If we ask for minus 1%, and we do that in good faith, allowing for discussions. So if we ask for a flat budget, then we have to ask questions and make essentially a negative argument, like, I'm not sure you need to spend it. And we're doing that with much less expertise than the people on the other side. I don't mean in an adversarial way, just purely in a knowledge way. Whereas if we say, well, try to cut it 1%, then they need to make a positive argument for saying, no, I can't do that because in order for level services or in order to do X, to do this, we need this, our budget ramped up. And that might actually be, kind of like a healthy shift in the mix.
I would just add as an addenda on that, of course, with, where inflation has been, a flat budget is actually a cut in inflation adjusted terms, that unless efficiencies are found would mean something that was done last year isn't going to be done this year. So even a flat budget is something like a 2%, 2.5% cut in real budget inflation adjusted terms. So
Guidance is really about setting expectations. That's really what it is, right? And kind of the mindset that people will approach the exercise, it seems to me. And so you always kind of feel disappointed or happy about something relative to expectations. And so I guess that's kind of the way we need to think about it, is what kind of expectations do we want to, what kind of mindset do we want to put people in this year, given what we know about the year, to sort of approach this whole exercise. And I think the reality is, listening to you, Dan, and thinking about this, that it is actually going to be a department by department exercise, no matter what expectations you set, whether you set -5 or +10. At the end of the day, we're still going to be going through each and every department, and it should be, because you can't apply flat guidance probably across the board, and you can't apply -1% guidance across the board. All of it's just too much of a blunt tool. And so I think really the way I sort of think about it is, what kind of expectation, what kind of mindset do we want budget makers to approach the exercise with? Do we want them to approach it from the perspective of really trying to tighten your belts this year? Really make start off with the hard choices and really make the positive argument? Or do we want to, set a different expectation, which is, we understand this is already a cut. I don't know, but I guess I think about it with expectations. And then I'm trying to understand, sometimes 1% is a really big deal. Sometimes 1% is not a really big deal. And I'm trying to understand how big of a deal 1% is. I just don't feel like I have a good sense for that.
I think it's going to be really different across
Yeah.
departments.
Yeah.
If you think about the departments with bigger budgets, 1% could add up to tens of thousands of dollars. And that's probably something that they're gonna have to say, okay, we were doing this before, we're not doing this anymore.
Right.
In other departments, it's gonna be, all right, we'll trim our postage budget a little bit
Yeah.
and trim this a little bit, whatever.
Yeah.
So I think it's gonna be, as to come back to your earlier
Back to
comment.
the thing.
I think
this
we'll be-
department of-
yeah. Yeah, Stephen,
Help me with my thinking for a moment. Everybody's budget has already gone up theoretically because pay just went up 2.5%. Health insurance went up. So you're asking them to save based on non-payroll related items. Would that be accurate?
that would be accurate.
So do we try to send the message, is the message that what we're trying to do on a global basis, keep the budget flat?
So if you literally mean global budget, including salaries, it's not gonna be flat.
Right.
What he's saying is that, would that imply a reduction in guidance for a reduction in the non-payroll, right? Is that what you're saying?
Correct.
Yeah.
Right, because if we're saying, do your budget with zero, and that's the global goal, I'm asking that in general, or do we carve out like the regional high school and say, well, that is gonna go up, but everything else should be flat?
So,
But we already have payroll increases and health insurance increases built in.
so the typical way the guidance letter goes, whatever that number is, it is the number that is applied to the non-payroll part of
Okay, so
budget.
that's the.
So I mean, you're kind of jumping to sort of what seems more like an element of long-term financial planning, which, if we had that and we were in a position to say, for the town to be on a sustainable path, budget increases should be, X this year and Y the year after and Z the year after to be on a sustainable path and, given Prop 2.5 limits and all of that. But that's not the number we're setting. We're really looking at a piece, the non-payroll piece, principally for, the municipal department budgets. I mean, the guidance goes to the school committees too, but they have their own thing and can go in, can and often do go in a different direction. But this is really a number to try to, picking up on Laura's point, to set expectations for where the non-payroll part budget would be. And whether it's, flat, -1. In either case, given inflation, either one is going to be a cut. And again, on Laura's point, really our work is going to be department by department, trying to figure out what makes sense and what doesn't.
Because the only lever, it seems to me, that they have to be really in zero in the aggregate is headcount.
Sure. But we're not proposing, this is not proposing a number for the aggregate. It's just, it's, we talked about a COLA number. This is proposing a number just for a piece.
Thanks for clarification.
Yeah. Just hang on a second. For others who haven't chimed in, Paul, Mike, Shelley, views,
Can you
thoughts?
just say the language again that you said another town was using, that was like flat service?
So, Sherborn has done guidance that's been flat, flat budget with, zero change, dollar amount to match last year's dollar amount for the non-payroll part of the budget.
Right.
I think Dover has often done what I would call current services, which is their guidance would be, we want you to maintain services. You tell us what budget number you need to maintain services, as compared to saying, we want you to hit the dollar number that matches last year's dollar number. We will also see, as part of the budget roll-up, budget numbers, spending for the last 3 years, and sort of what was the average, which also helps a little bit on Ken's point of trying to identify departments and places where budgets jumped last year, and then, well, wait, why did it jump last year? Is that a permanent thing? Is that a temporary thing? And, that will also, I think, be a helpful tool for us. So, all right, but coming back, so thoughts on where we might want to land?
One thing to kind of keep in mind, I think, so if I remember last year's budget correctly, it got funded largely because of excess levy capacity, right? I think that's true, right? So we kind of ate into that kind of margin we had. So I think it's, like, to me, I think flat guidance and kind of, as Laura said, maybe starting to make hard choices, I think is the message that I think we should be giving. Flat guidance and kind of that we'll be critiquing and wanting to help budget owners to sort of cut where possible. The expectation I'd like to set.
Please join me at capital budget committee meetings.
I guess I will be.
Please do. Yes, you will be.
And, whatever number we settle on, I will also do my best in drafting language to go around these numbers to try to kind of capture the tone of this discussion. Mike, thoughts?
Yeah, level of funding. I mean, with all of this conversation, I keep coming back to, we're going to be talking to them on an individual basis, and that conversation is far more important than drilling down on the details of the letter. So I think the letter lays out, do your best to keep within the budget from last year, and then when we actually see the budgets and we're actually talking to them, it's like you said, it's our job to kind of drill down on the details and see if we can root out some savings and make sure that the budget's doing what it's supposed to do.
Is there a way to phrase something so along the lines of up to flat guidance, or, you know what I mean? Like, it's a way to kind of have a mindset where people are see this flat as kind of the upper limit, which, I mean, there'll be people that go above that too, but.
I mean, there certainly can be language, I think, that conveys, not in great detail, because this isn't going to be a
Yeah.
5-page,
Yeah.
summary of town finances, but that conveys, the sense of a very tight, likely to be a very tight budget year. The town has been moving closer to the Prop 2.5 limits. Probably still some excess levy capacity, but when there's a roll-up, we'll see how much there is. Don't really know. There might not be much. So to convey the notion of very tight, very likely to be a very tight budget year, looking for savings wherever possible. And then, whatever number, can also be done as a, that's meant to be a starting point. And once there's a budget roll up, we're gonna, as a committee, sort of reassess, where things stand. Because if you again, this is not a forecast, just, a hypothetical. If we landed in a situation where budget roll up says to spend that amount of money, we would need to go to the voters, go to the town for an override, I think we would do some hard thinking about where do we want to land. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, so I probably should have phrased this, my thinking is clarified. And I guess where I was coming from with the 1% is essentially, we always ask for flat guidance.
Have for many years.
And I think if we say flat guidance, we're saying, okay, business as usual. Which is not necessarily a bad thing, but it's like, okay, business as usual. Whereas if we can look at, and I know it's extraordinary, if we look at an over 2% excess, we could say, all right, wait a minute, there was an excess. If we do minus 1%, it's setting, an expectation that we are not looking at this year as business as usual. So that's kind of like where I was coming from. I probably should have said that clearer 20 minutes ago.
Yeah, thanks. Wherever we land on a number, I think the language in the letter can convey this discussion that this is not a business as usual year, whether the number we land at is -1 or 0.
Right. Absolutely.
As certainly given this conversation as it should. Other views, sense of where this ought to go?
I had a question, Jeremy, or Deb, where can I find on the Sherborn Town website? I could see the tax rate going back years and years and, average assessment, average sale, all that. But what about the budget?
There's under the town administrator's page, there's some finance budgets and history there. And we'll be, as we do the roll-ups and develop this year's, we'll keep posting stuff under there. There's a-
Going back like 10 plus years?
Not quite that far.
Yeah.
We can certainly get that summary for you.
Well, related to that, when you go to the Sherborn Town website, there's a button that says website sign in. Who's signing in the website?
It's for the back end, that's for the.
It's for the employees or,
Yeah.
okay, got it.
So the budget roll from last year is posted there, right? Which will go back 3 or 4 or 5 years.
Correct.
So when I want to get those numbers, the State Department of Local Services has a webpage or a portal that is just chock full of data. It's called the DLS Data Bank. So if you just Google DLS Data Bank, you can, for all 351 cities and towns.
Division of Local
Yep,
Services,
Division of-
DLS.
yes. For all 351 cities and towns, whatever selection you want, you can get numbers on overall operating budget, tax rate, host of things. So when I pulled together comparisons of, here's Sherborn compared to 5
Mhm.
other towns on tax rates, that's where I'm getting all the data from.
Oh, thank you.
So that, if you want a longer perspective, that would be, and you just sort of want to mess around and look for things, that would be a
Mhm.
place to go. All
So-
right, so coming up on 9 o'clock. My sense of the room is Penn's at -1. Most other people seem to be more around the flat guidance. If that's a reasonable sense of the room, anybody feel like we're at a point to make a motion and settle on a number?
I'm happy to make a motion if we advise on guidance.
Okay, all right. Second,
I'll second the motion.
okay. Any discussion around that?
Is there a way we can amend that motion to have it be flat guidance with language conveying, I don't know if it would be that specific in the motion, but
Certainly can, I mean, in the
That's
draft,
idea, yeah.
in the draft I'm gonna do, I certainly
Okay.
intend to do
you do
that.
that, okay.
And the draft, it's not me, it's as a committee, we're gonna have to approve that draft. But if Doug wants to add, I mean, it's fine, if you guys wanna add that in, sure,
Okay, that's understood, that's great.
okay.
That was my understanding too. That was my understanding, that's the language.
Okay. All right, but so we've got your motion, your second.
Just a point of clarification. The guidance is on non-payroll related items.
Yes. Yes, yes. As, the number that will go into our budget guidance letter, which I think I previously circulated last year's. I'll, use that as the base, but given this conversation, I think the surrounding language is going to be different than last year's. So any further discussion on that motion? Then let's vote. Start over here with you, Doug.
Sorry.
Aye.
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 And I'm I as well. Okay, so 9-0. Okay. So I will put a draft together. I'll try to get it to everybody by, say, Monday. Should be able to do that. And again, it's not my draft, it's the committee's draft. So I'm putting it together just as a way of facilitating the process. I'm going to do my best to kind of capture the tenor of the conversation. But when that draft comes around, everybody should feel very free to edit, make suggestions, changes, whatever, because it's meant to be a letter that's the consensus view.
If we're done with this, I have a couple quick questions, process questions.
Okay, I think we're done. So
First question is the draft calendar finalized? Are we changing it or for meetings?
So it's not finalized. That will actually, so the letter will be these numbers, some text, and then it will include the schedule of meetings and will include the list of liaisons. None of that is locked in stone.
Okay,
So
but this
if,
is the working assumption that this is this calendar for now.
yeah,
Change.
if, something happens, and it turns out we need additional meetings, we'll add meetings. If something happens where, there's some blizzard and it just doesn't make sense to me, we won't meet, whatever.
Different question, are the liaison assignments now set, or is this still in flux?
So I was thinking of them as relatively set, but if, I tried hard to sort of do things in, what I thought was an equitable way and get different people. I don't think, everybody got exactly everything they wanted, but I tried to make sure that people landed in some places with things that they were interested in, maybe a few places of things that they were less interested in. So it'll go out as part of our letter. So if there's something that needs to change, we can, take a vote on that next week.
So assuming this is the list, or I guess I changed a little, but this is the list, what are we expected to do by what date?
Oh,
So
okay.
I'm the liaison to the agricultural.
Yeah, okay. So do you have the version I sent around this morning or from last week? Okay. So on Deb's suggestion, I added some notation to that to indicate the items where it's a revolving fund rather than operating budget, and also to indicate items like the Agricultural Commission that actually doesn't have a budget.
Right.
So for those committees or categories that don't have a budget, odds are there's nothing to do. If an issue comes up, so the Agricultural Commission was, working hard to try to persuade the select board to put a warrant article on that had to do with their business, then there'd be stuff to talk about and, it'd be looking to you to sort of be our point person in following that. Odds are nothing's going to happen there that's going to have budget implications or town meeting implications. So odds are there isn't going to be anything to do. In terms of, and the revolving funds are different. We do make recommendations on revolving funds. So, there is actual work to do. I would say it would be good to make contact. So we'll send our letter out if we can converge on text next week. By late next week, the letter will go out to all budget makers. They're going to be submitting budgets to you, I think, for December 10th-ish, something like that. So I would say between the time the letter goes out and December 10th-ish, it would be good to touch base with budget makers and just say, hey, I'm advisory's liaison. If it's Agricultural Commission,
Well,
it's
city has a budget.
probably worth an email to just say, hey, I'm the liaison. If there's any stuff you have going that has budget implications or town meeting implications, we should talk. Otherwise, I'm available if there's anything you want to talk about.
Yeah.
But on the ones with budget implications, I think you'd want to reach out and start making contact, kind of find out, is there anything unusual happening, big changes? On the school budgets, they're going to have a series of meetings coming up. Actually, I think some pretty soon, where they're going to be presenting. I think one might even be next week, Tuesday night. Maybe a week later. But I'll send those around to all the school liaisons to schedule, where they're going to present the first version of the budget. The business administrator will present the first version of the budget to the school committee. It's kind of useful. We don't really participate in those meetings, but it's useful to sit and listen and just kind of hear what they're up to and kind of get a sense of, where are they? And then typically on the schools thing in early January, the liaisons sit down with Don Fattori, the business administrator, and that's where we really do the line by line. What about this? What about that? Do you really need to be doing that? And then, there's also an advisory meeting when the school comes and presents her budget to the bigger group. So that's what I'd suggest on timing. Deb?
My last question, which I'm embarrassed to say, I don't know who Deb
Oh,
is.
I'm
Oh.
Deb Seaton, the finance director.
Finance director.
Sorry, I think we did introductions at a past meeting when
Okay,
you were here.
sorry.
Yeah.
I'm Deb.
Doug Kingsley, who is joining advisory this year.
I did just want to mention that when your guidance letters goes out, hopefully next week,
Yeah.
the following week is when I'll be sending the departments their budget worksheets. So I would reach out to them right away, give them a week at least to have their budget worksheet so they can see kind of where they stand and what their history was. And so my goal is November the 12th to send those out.
Okay, okay. And if, on that point, if you bumped into somebody, you could just say, hey, I'm your liaison, we'll be talking soon. Since, as Deb said, they won't have a lot to talk about until a little bit later.
Is that, this might be embarrassing questions, but do we know who to reach out to?
So, for most of these, you can just go to the town's website and find department head as the person to reach out to. If you need, if you're not finding an email or a name or whatever, you can either get in touch with me or Jeremy, and can provide that connection. But I think a lot of it you just would find on the town's webpage. Anything else? Okay. I think we are done, if anyone,
I make a motion to adjourn the meeting.
Second.
okay.
Yankees are up 4-0.
Good to know. All right, quick roll call before we quit, adjourning the meeting. Stephen,
Sir?
adjourning the
Aye.
meeting. Penn,
Aye.
Paul, Nora,
Aye.
Mike,
Aye.
Aye.
Shelley,
Aye.
Doug, and I'm as well. Okay, great. Okay, thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Glad we got through that. I will have a draft by Monday-ish.